The Oberstleutnant stood motionless at his forward observation post somewhere in the Hurtgen forest, eastern Belgium. It was December 19th, 1944, 13 days into what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Through his field glasses, he watched another American division moving into position, fresh uniforms, full equipment, vehicles that looked factory new. This was the third new American division he had observed in 5 days. Before that, 2 more, and intelligence reports suggested at least 4 additional divisions were moving up from reserve positions. The mathematics made no sense. His own regiment had been fighting continuously since June, with no replacements, no rest, dwindling to half strength. Yet the Americans kept producing entire divisions, fully equipped, apparently inexhaustible. He lowered his field glasses and retrieved a crumpled intelligence briefing from his coat pocket. The document, prepared by Wehrmacht intelligence in early Inche, 1942. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Confidently stated that America possessed neither the industrial capacity nor the social cohesion to field a modern mechanized army. American soldiers were predicted to be soft, undisciplined, unable to withstand the rigors of sustained combat against professional German troops. The Oberstleutnant looked again at the American positions. Soft, undisciplined, unable to withstand combat. He thought of the American artillery that had pounded his regiment for 3 days straight, firing shells at rates that consumed more ammunition in hours than his own artillery received in weeks. He thought of the American tanks that kept coming, wave after wave, replacements arriving faster than his Panzerfaust teams could knock them out. He thought of the American airstrikes that made daytime movement suicidal, that turned roads into graveyards, that seemed to find every German concentration within hours. The intelligence briefing predicted that America would struggle to field, perhaps 20 to 30 divisions for European operations. The document in his hand was dated March 1942. It was now December 19th, 1944. 32 months had passed, and in those 32 months, something had happened that German military planners insisted was impossible, something that shattered every calculation, every prediction, every confident assessment of American military capability. The Americans had not struggled to field 20 or 30 divisions, they had deployed an avalanche. 3 years earlier, in the winter of 1941 to 1942, German military intelligence had compiled extensive assessments of American military potential. These reports were thorough, systematic, based on observable facts. The United States Army in 1941 numbered fewer than 200,000 active duty personnel, ranking it 18th in the world, smaller than Romania's army, smaller even than Belgium's forces before the German invasion. American equipment was obsolete by European standards. The army possessed fewer than 400 modern tanks. Artillery was mostly World War I vintage. The Air Corps operated antiquated biplanes alongside a handful of modern fighters. Transportation was partially horse-drawn, training was minimal, combat experience was non-existent. The assessments seemed entirely reasonable. How could such a military, with such limited foundation, suddenly transform into a force capable of challenging German military supremacy? The German intelligence services made careful calculations. Building divisions takes time. Training soldiers requires months. Producing equipment demands industrial capacity and expertise. Creating competent officers necessitates years of professional education. Developing effective doctrine can't be rushed. The Wehrmacht had been preparing since 1933. America was starting from almost nothing in 1941. Therefore, German analysts concluded America might eventually field a significant army, but not for years. Perhaps by 1945 or 1946, if they maintained consistent effort and if nothing went wrong, they might deploy perhaps 20 to 30 divisions to Europe. These would be inexperienced, inadequately trained, and poorly led. German professional soldiers would dominate them tactically. Quality would overcome quantity. This assessment was distributed throughout Wehrmacht command structures. Officers planning defensive operations in France used these figures. Commanders estimating required reserve forces accepted these numbers. Strategic planners allocated resources based on this timeline. Hitler himself referenced American military weakness in planning conferences, dismissing the possibility that American forces could significantly impact the European theatre before German victory over the Soviet Union was complete. The first serious shock to these comfortable assumptions came in North Africa. On November 8, 1942, American forces landed in Morocco and Algeria as part of Operation Torch. 3 divisions, the 3rd and 9th Infantry plus the 2nd Armoured, approximately 35,000 combat troops, struck French colonial forces in Morocco, while additional forces landed in Algeria. German commanders initially dismissed this as strategically insignificant. 3 divisions, attacking French colonial troops, not Germans. The Americans would learn quickly what real combat meant when they faced professional Wehrmacht units. That education came at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, February 14th through 25th, 1943. General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps inflicted a devastating tactical defeat on American forces. 6,300 American casualties, including 300 killed, 3,000 wounded, 3,000 missing or captured. 183 American tanks destroyed or abandoned. The Germans suffered only 989 casualties total. German propaganda seized on Kasserine Pass as validation of every prediction about American military incompetence. Nazi newspapers proclaimed that American soldiers broke and ran when facing professional German troops. Radio broadcasts mocked American tactical ineptitude. This, the propagandists insisted, was what happened when a mongrel democracy tried to fight warriors with pure blood and professional training. But experienced German field commanders noticed something unsettling in the aftermath. The Americans absorbed the defeat, reorganized rapidly, and returned to offensive operations within weeks. More disturbing, the equipment losses that should have crippled American units for months were replaced almost immediately. Entire tank battalions that lost most of their armor were fully re-equipped within days. Artillery batteries that abandoned guns received new pieces before the week ended. Supply dumps captured by German forces contained more material than entire German divisions possessed. Field Marshal Rommel himself recognized what Nazi propagandists refused to see. In his journal, he wrote that the tactical conduct of the enemy's defense had been first class after initial shock. American forces had recovered quickly and successfully blocked German advances by repositioning reserves and establishing defensive positions. In later writings, he acknowledged that American generals showed advanced capability in tactical handling of forces. The Desert Fox, one of Germany's most capable commanders, was seeing something that Hitler and propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels could not accept. The Americans learned quickly. They adapted tactics, and most alarming, their material superiority was staggering. By May 13, 1943, just 3 months after Kasserine Pass, American and British forces had driven Axis armies completely from North Africa. Approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered in Tunisia, ending Axis presence on the African continent. The lesson of Kasserine Pass was not American incompetence, it was American adaptability and industrial depth. But the real shock was still building. Throughout 1943, as German forces fought desperate defensive battles on the Eastern Front and prepared for inevitable Allied invasion of Western Europe, Wehrmacht intelligence received increasingly alarming reports about American force deployment. The numbers seemed impossible. They violated everything German experience suggested about military mobilization timelines. In January 1942, when German intelligence predicted America might eventually field 20 to 30 divisions, the United States had fewer than 10 divisions in various stages of organization. By December 1942, 12 months later, the number had grown to 37 divisions activated. By December 1943, 73 divisions were activated. The expansion wasn't gradual. It was exponential. It was unprecedented. And German intelligence officers struggled to accept their own data. The reports documented American divisions deploying overseas at rates that seemed to violate the basic physics of military mobilization. In 1942, 10 American divisions deployed overseas, primarily to the Pacific and North Africa. In 1943, another 9 divisions deployed as Mediterranean operations expanded through Sicily and Italy. But 1944 brought numbers that made previous deployments look like preliminary training exercises. During the first 9 months of 1944, more American divisions deployed overseas than had shipped out during the previous 2 years combined. By the end of September 1944, 40 divisions were located in Europe, with 4 more en route. 21 divisions operated in the Pacific. The Mediterranean theatre held 15 divisions, though several of these were being withdrawn for redeployment to France. German defensive plans for resisting Allied invasion had been predicated on facing perhaps 15 to 20 American divisions supported by British and Canadian forces. The actual numbers exceeded worst-case German projections, and the Americans showed no signs of slowing down. The invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, demonstrated the gap between German expectations and American reality with devastating clarity. German intelligence had predicted the invasion, obviously. The question was never whether but when and where the Allies would attempt a cross-channel assault. What German commanders failed to anticipate was the scale. Operation Overlord, the code name for the Normandy invasion, represented the largest amphibious operation in human history. Nearly 7,000 naval vessels participated, including 1,200 warships and over 4,000 landing craft. Approximately 11,600 aircraft provided air support and transport. In the first day alone, June 6, 156,000 Allied troops landed on 5 beaches. By the end of June, 850,000 troops had crossed the Channel. By August, over 2 million Allied soldiers were operating in France. The American contribution dwarfed German predictions. On D-Day itself, approximately 73,000 American troops landed on Utah and Omaha beaches. Within weeks, entire army groups were operating in Normandy. The First Army, commanded by General Omar Bradley, consisted of multiple corps, each containing multiple divisions. The Third Army, commanded by General George Patton, would become operational in August with equal strength. By September, American ground forces in Europe were organized into 2 massive army groups, the 12th under Bradley and the 6th under General Jacob Devers, containing 5 field armies and dozens of divisions. German commanders facing this onslaught struggled to comprehend the logistics involved. Each American division required enormous quantities of supplies: food, fuel, ammunition, replacement equipment, medical supplies, spare parts. Supporting a single American infantry division in combat consumed approximately 650 tons of supplies daily. An armored division required even more. The mathematics were staggering. Supporting 40 divisions required 26,000 tons of supplies daily. Where was this material coming from? How were the Americans transporting it? How could any nation sustain such consumption rates? The answer lay in industrial capacity and organizational systems that German intelligence had consistently underestimated throughout the war. American factories were producing military equipment at rates that German analysts had insisted were propaganda exaggerations. American logistics systems were moving supplies with efficiency that German commanders had believed impossible for a democracy. And American manpower mobilization had created an army larger and better equipped than Wehrmacht intelligence assessments suggested America could achieve in 5 years, let alone 3. By late 1944, as the Oberstleutnant stood in his observation post watching yet another American division move into position, the full magnitude of German miscalculation was becoming undeniable. The soft, undisciplined American soldiers that propaganda had promised would be easy victories were instead grinding down German defenses through sheer material superiority. Every tactical victory German forces achieved was negated by American ability to absorb losses and continue attacking. Every successful German defense was eventually overwhelmed by American artillery firing at rates no German unit could match. The intelligence briefing the Oberstleutnant carried in his pocket, predicting America might struggle to field. 20 to 30 divisions, was 3 years out of date. The actual number of American divisions that would deploy to Europe would exceed 60. Including Mediterranean operations, American forces would field 76 divisions total in the European theatre. The Pacific War would absorb an additional 22 divisions. America had mobilized 91 divisions total, 3 times what German intelligence predicted was possible, and maintained them at near full strength throughout the war. But the story of how America achieved this expansion, how they trained these divisions, how they equipped them, and how German intelligence failed so catastrophically to anticipate American military potential, requires understanding the fundamental miscalculations that shaped Wehrmacht strategic planning from the moment America entered the war. The confidence with which German officers dismissed American military capability in 1941 and 1942 was not mere propaganda. It was based on what seemed like rational analysis of observable facts. Understanding why those facts led to such wrong conclusions reveals something profound about the nature of modern industrial warfare and the dangers of underestimating enemy potential based on peacetime appearances. The German assessment of American military capability began with examining the United States Army as it existed in 1941. The numbers seem to speak for themselves. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, the Wehrmacht fielded approximately 103 divisions, totaling nearly 3 million men. By June 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Wehrmacht strength had grown to over 3 million personnel in 152 divisions. The United States Army in September 1939 numbered approximately 190,000 active duty personnel organized into 5 infantry divisions and 1 cavalry division. The National Guard added approximately 200,000 men, organized into 18 divisions, but these were part-time soldiers with minimal training and obsolete equipment. The total American military establishment was smaller than many individual German army groups on the Eastern Front. Even after President Roosevelt declared a limited national emergency in September 1939 and authorized expansion to 227,000 regulars, the American military remained tiny by European standards. The expansion continued throughout 1940. The Selective Service Act, enacted September 16, 1940, authorized conscription and aimed to build the army to 1,400,000 men by 1941. National Guard divisions were federalized and called to active duty for training. German intelligence tracked these developments and compiled assessments. The analysis appeared straightforward. America was starting from a very small base. Expansion would take years. Each infantry division required approximately 15,000 personnel. Training a division to combat readiness took at least 1 year under peacetime conditions, longer during wartime, when qualified instructors were scarce and training facilities were oversubscribed. Building divisions was not simply a matter of assigning men to units. Soldiers needed individual training in weapons and tactics. Units required collective training to function as cohesive formations. Officers needed to learn how to command at different levels. Staff officers required specialized training in logistics, intelligence, communications, combined arms training, teaching infantry, artillery, armor, and air forces to work together was the most complex and time-consuming phase. Based on Wehrmacht experience, German analysts calculated that America might activate perhaps 2 to 3 divisions monthly if they maintained intense effort and if everything proceeded smoothly. Starting from a base of fewer than 10 divisions in early 1941, expanding to even 30 divisions would require at least 2 years, probably longer. Training these divisions to genuine combat readiness would add 6 months to a year beyond activation. Therefore, German intelligence estimated America could not field significant forces in Europe before mid to late 1944 at earliest, possibly not until 1945. These estimates seemed conservative and realistic. They matched German understanding of how military expansion worked. They aligned with Wehrmacht's own expansion timeline from 1933 to 1939. They appeared to account for all the variables: training time, equipment production, officer development, doctrine creation. The calculations were logical. The conclusions seemed inevitable. What German intelligence failed to understand was that American military expansion would not follow German patterns. America possessed structural advantages that had no equivalent in German experience. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Advantages that would allow military mobilization at speeds Wehrmacht analysts considered impossible. The first advantage was industrial capacity on a continental scale. Germany in 1941 controlled most of Europe and could exploit the industrial resources of conquered territories. France, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Poland, the Netherlands all contributed to German war production. Yet, even with this expanded base, German industry struggled to produce sufficient equipment for Wehrmacht expansion. Tank production in 1941 reached approximately 3,600 vehicles. Artillery production, small arms manufacturing, ammunition output, all operated at maximum sustainable rates. There was no reserve capacity, no idle factories waiting to be converted. German industry was already running at near-peak efficiency. America in 1941 had massive unused industrial capacity. The Great Depression had idled factories across the nation. Automobile plants operated at reduced output or stood empty. Steel mills ran below capacity. Machine tool manufacturers had excess production capability. Millions of skilled workers remained unemployed or underemployed. This wasn't weakness. It was an enormous reserve waiting to be activated. When President Roosevelt announced military production goals in May 1940, calling for 50,000 aircraft annually, German intelligence dismissed the figure as propaganda. Germany's entire aircraft industry produced perhaps 10,000 planes in 1940. How could America, with minimal aircraft industry, suddenly increase production fivefold? The answer lay in recognizing that American automobile factories, which were building millions of cars annually before the Depression, could be converted to building aircraft using the same mass production techniques. American factories that made refrigerators, radios, sewing machines, typewriters could all be converted to military production. The machinery existed. The workers had the skills. The organizational systems were proven. Only the product needed to change. German intelligence officers saw peacetime American production figures and assumed wartime expansion would follow gradual, incremental patterns they understood. They failed to grasp that American industry could shift from consumer goods to military production rapidly, precisely because the infrastructure already existed. Converting a factory from making cars to making tanks took months, not years. Retraining workers from civilian to military production took weeks, not months. Ramping up production volumes in existing facilities happened faster than building new facilities from scratch. The second advantage was population. Germany in 1941 had approximately 80 million people within its pre-war borders. Occupied territories added population, but most of these people were unwilling subjects who could not be trusted in military service. Germany could mobilize perhaps 20% of its population for military service without catastrophic economic collapse. This provided a manpower pool of perhaps 15 to 16 million men, but many were needed for war production, agriculture, administration. The Wehrmacht peaked at approximately 11 million personnel, representing the practical limit of German mobilization. America had a population of approximately 132 million in 1941. 20% mobilization would provide over 26 million potential service members. The actual number who served during the war exceeded 16 million. Over 11 million served in the army alone. This was raw numbers Germany simply could not match. But numbers alone meant nothing without the ability to train, equip, and support those personnel. This was where German intelligence made their most fundamental error. They assumed American military expansion would be constrained by the same factors that limited Wehrmacht growth. They failed to recognize that American advantages in industrial capacity and organizational flexibility would allow much faster expansion than German experience suggested was possible. The third advantage was geography. Germany fought on multiple fronts simultaneously from the war's beginning. Poland, France, North Africa, the Balkans, the Soviet Union. German divisions were scattered across conquered territories, requiring garrison forces, occupation troops, rear security. Training new divisions competed with combat operations for resources, instructors, or facilities. America faced no such constraints. Protected by two oceans, American territory was never directly threatened. Training could proceed without interruption from enemy action. Facilities could be built without fear of bombing. New divisions could be activated, trained, and equipped in complete safety before being committed to combat. This allowed systematic, efficient training that German forces, constantly responding to immediate combat requirements, could never match. The fourth advantage was experience with mass organization. American industry had pioneered mass production techniques, assembly lines, interchangeable parts, division of labor, statistical quality control. All these were American innovations applied first to civilian manufacturing. Henry Ford's automobile assembly lines represented organizational efficiency that German industry, with its emphasis on skilled craftsmanship, had never fully embraced. When America mobilized for war, these organizational principles transferred directly to military production and training. Divisions could be built using assembly line logic, standardization of equipment, interchangeability of parts, systematic training programs. These allowed rapid expansion while maintaining quality. German intelligence officers, trained in European military traditions emphasizing craftsmanship and individual excellence, struggled to comprehend how mass production thinking could apply to military forces. They saw American emphasis on standardization as evidence of inferiority. Surely armies built like automobile assembly lines would lack the proficiency of forces built through traditional methods? This cultural bias prevented them from recognizing that modern industrial warfare favored quantity and standardization over individual quality. 1,000 adequate tanks could accomplish more than 100 superior tanks. 10 divisions of competently trained soldiers could achieve more than 5 divisions of elite troops. American military planning understood this. German intelligence did not. These structural advantages, industrial reserve capacity, larger population, geographic security, experience with mass organization, combined to enable American military expansion at rates that violated German expectations. But understanding why expansion happened faster than predicted requires examining how America actually built its army, the systems and processes that turned predictions of 20 to 30 divisions into reality of 91 divisions. The expansion began before Pearl Harbor. Between September 1940 and December 1941, 16 months, the United States Army grew from approximately 267,000 to 1,643,000 personnel. This included mobilization of 18 National Guard divisions between September 1940 and October 1941. New regular Army and Army of the United States divisions were activated throughout 1941. By December 7th, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, 29 divisions existed in various stages of organization and training. This peacetime expansion, though impressive, still seemed within German predictions. 29 divisions in 16 months, averaging roughly 2 divisions monthly. At this rate, reaching 50 divisions would take another year. Reaching 75 divisions would require 1944. German intelligence officers tracking American mobilization saw nothing inconsistent with their estimates. What they failed to anticipate was that Pearl Harbor would trigger acceleration far beyond peacetime expansion rates. American public opinion, previously divided about entering the war, unified overnight. Industrial mobilization, which had proceeded gradually under peacetime constraints, shifted to maximum effort. Draft boards, which had been filling quotas conservatively, began processing recruits at unprecedented rates. Congress, which had debated defense spending cautiously, authorized virtually unlimited resources for military expansion. Between December 1941 and December 1942, American military personnel grew from 1,643,000 to 5,400,000. Division activation accelerated dramatically. By the end of 1942, 37 additional divisions had been activated, bringing the total to 73. The expansion rate had more than doubled compared to peacetime mobilization. German intelligence received reports of this expansion throughout 1942. The numbers were verified through multiple sources. Signals intelligence intercepted American military communications. Agent networks in neutral countries reported on American industrial activity. Prisoners captured in North Africa confirmed unit identifications and organizational structures. The evidence was consistent and undeniable. America was building an army far faster than German analysts had predicted possible. But Wehrmacht commanders, focused on immediate combat operations against the Soviet Union and defensive preparations against Allied invasion, largely ignored the strategic implications. Even if America activated 70 or 80 divisions, German thinking went, most would be needed in the Pacific against Japan. Perhaps 20 divisions might deploy to Europe. German forces had defeated larger Allied armies in 1940. What difference would 20 American divisions make against battle-hardened Wehrmacht formations? This dismissive attitude persisted through the North African campaign. Even as American divisions demonstrated increasing competence in Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy during 1943, German commanders focused on tactical victories rather than strategic trends. Yes, Americans were improving. But they were still learning. Wehrmacht forces consistently achieved favorable loss ratios in combat. German tactical superiority remained evident. Individual battles confirmed German fighting prowess. What German analysis missed was that tactical victories were becoming strategically irrelevant. The question was not whether German soldiers could defeat American soldiers in individual engagements. The question was whether Germany possessed sufficient forces to defeat the sheer number of divisions America was deploying while simultaneously fighting the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. By mid-1944, that question had a clear answer, and the answer was devastating for German strategic prospects. The Normandy invasion in June 1944 brought German miscalculation into sharp, undeniable focus. Within the first 24 hours, 156,000 Allied troops established beachheads. Within a week, 326,000 troops had landed. By the end of June, 850,000 troops operated in Normandy. These weren't garrison forces or rear echelon troops. These were combat divisions, fully equipped, adequately trained, supported by logistics systems that delivered supplies at rates German forces could never achieve. The American contribution alone was staggering. First Army under General Bradley initially deployed with 5 infantry divisions and 2 airborne divisions for the Normandy assault. Within weeks, additional divisions poured into France. Third Army became operational on August 1st, with 4 corps comprising 12 divisions. By September, American ground forces in France had grown to 2 army groups containing 5 field armies, 13 corps, and over 40 divisions. German defenders facing this avalanche of American power experienced something unprecedented in Wehrmacht history. They were not being outfought tactically. German troops consistently inflicted higher casualties than they sustained. Individual German units frequently demonstrated superior tactical proficiency, but tactical excellence meant nothing when facing enemies who replaced losses immediately while German strength dwindled irreversibly. A Wehrmacht regiment reduced to 60% strength through combat losses might wait weeks or months for replacements that never arrived. Units were consolidated, merged, reorganized to maintain combat capability with declining manpower. Divisions that started campaigns at full strength gradually shrank to shells of their authorized size. By late 1944, many German divisions existed only on paper, their actual combat strength consisting of a few thousand exhausted survivors. American divisions that sustained heavy casualties in combat were withdrawn, brought back to full strength with fresh replacements, re-equipped with new vehicles and weapons, and returned to the line within days or weeks. The 1st Infantry Division, which landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day and fought continuously through France, suffered enormous casualties but remained combat effective because the replacement system kept the division near authorized strength. The 29th Infantry Division, which also assaulted Omaha Beach, lost thousands of men in Normandy fighting but continued operating as a fully functional division because replacements arrived faster than casualties depleted the unit. This was not superior American tactics. This was industrial warfare operating at a level Germany could not match. Every American division in combat was backed by training facilities in the United States producing thousands of individual replacements monthly. Basic training centers processed recruits continuously. Advanced individual training taught specialized skills. Replacement training centers prepared soldiers for immediate integration into combat units. The entire system operated like an assembly line, continuously producing trained personnel to replace combat losses. German replacement systems, by contrast, were collapsing under multiple pressures. Manpower resources were exhausted. The Wehrmacht had suffered millions of casualties on the Eastern Front. Recruiting standards had been lowered repeatedly. 16-year-old boys and 50-year-old men filled ranks once held by trained professional soldiers. Training time decreased as the need for immediate replacements grew. Urgent. Divisions received barely trained recruits with minimal preparation, thrown into combat out of desperation rather than readiness. The Americans also demonstrated organizational flexibility that Wehrmacht structures could not match. When infantry divisions in Europe began taking heavy casualties in 1944, particularly in rifle companies that bore the brunt of combat, the United States Army responded by ruthlessly raiding divisions still training in America. Infantry replacements were extracted from these divisions and shipped to Europe. The divisions they came from had to start training cycles over with new personnel, but combat units in Europe remained supplied with trained riflemen. This organizational pragmatism shocked German officers familiar with rigid Wehrmacht structures. Dividing a division, pulling out trained personnel before deployment, disrupting training cycles, all seemed wasteful and inefficient by German standards. But American military leadership recognized that keeping combat divisions in Europe at full strength was more important than maintaining pristine training programs at home. The war would be won or lost in France, not in American training camps. Resources flowed to where they mattered most. By September 1944, as Allied forces pursued German armies across France toward the German border, the cumulative impact of American division deployment was undeniable. The 12th Army Group under General Bradley commanded 4 field armies: 1st Army, 3rd Army, 9th Army, and 15th Army. The 6th Army Group under General Devers commanded 7th Army and French 1st Army. Combined, these army groups contained more than 50 American divisions in France alone. This was more than double what German intelligence had predicted America could deploy to Europe, and the numbers continued growing. Additional divisions arrived from the United States monthly. By December 1944, when Germany launched its desperate Ardennes counter-offensive, American forces in Europe exceeded 60 divisions. The Mediterranean theater contained additional American divisions fighting in Italy. The Pacific War absorbed 22 divisions fighting Japan. America had mobilized and deployed 91 divisions total, maintained at near full strength through continuous replacement flows, supported by logistics systems that delivered supplies at unprecedented rates. The German counter-offensive in the Ardennes, launched December 16, 1944, represented Wehrmacht's last major offensive operation in the West. The attack achieved complete tactical surprise through careful security measures and radio silence. German forces drove through American lines in Belgium and Luxembourg, creating a massive bulge in Allied positions. For several days, the offensive appeared successful. American units were surrounded, isolated, thrown into confusion. German tanks advanced toward the Meuse River. Allied commanders scrambled to respond. But the Battle of the Bulge ultimately demonstrated exactly why German strategic planning had failed so catastrophically. The Wehrmacht could still achieve tactical surprise. German soldiers could still fight with skill and courage. but Germany lacked the resources to exploit tactical success against enemies with overwhelming material superiority. The offensive consumed Germany's last reserves of fuel, armor, and experienced troops for minimal strategic gain. And when American forces recovered from initial surprise, the response demonstrated the decisive advantage of American military mobilization. Within days of the German attack, General Eisenhower ordered massive reinforcements to the threatened sector. Entire divisions were shifted from quiet sectors to the Ardennes. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, resting and refitting after Operation Market Garden, were rushed to Bastogne and other critical points. The 10th Armoured Division, 3rd Armoured Division, and multiple infantry divisions converged on the penetration. In less than a week, more American troops reinforced the Ardennes sector than the entire German attacking force. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne, was sustained by air supply while armoured columns fought through to relieve them. The division held against repeated German attacks until the 4th Armoured Division broke through on December 26th. The Americans suffered approximately 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, 23,000 captured or missing during the Battle of the Bulge. These were terrible casualties, the highest American losses in any single battle of the European War. But within weeks, American forces were stronger than before the offensive began. Replacement personnel filled the casualty gaps. Equipment losses were replaced from supply depots and new production. Units that suffered heavily were rotated to rear areas, rebuilt to full strength, and returned to combat. By late January 1945, when the Bulge was eliminated and American forces resumed offensive operations, German strength had declined irreversibly, while American strength had recovered completely. German losses in the Ardennes, approximately 12,000 killed, 38,000 wounded, 30,000 captured or missing, could not be replaced. These were Wehrmacht's last trained reserves. The fuel consumed in the offensive, approximately 4 million gallons, represented irreplaceable stocks. The panzers destroyed, several hundred tanks, could not be rebuilt. The Luftwaffe effort, which briefly achieved local air superiority through maximum sortie rates, exhausted remaining fuel reserves, and lost experienced pilots who could not be replaced. The Ardennes offensive revealed in microcosm everything wrong with German strategic planning since 1941. Superior German tactical ability achieved initial success, but American material superiority ultimately overwhelmed German forces. The ability to absorb devastating losses and continue fighting with undiminished strength was something Wehrmacht experience could not comprehend. German military tradition emphasized quality, professionalism, efficiency. American military practice demonstrated that quantity, properly organized and supported, defeated quality when the numerical advantage was sufficiently overwhelming. Wehrmacht officers observing American operations in late 1944 and early 1945 witnessed industrial warfare at a scale beyond anything in human history. American artillery fired support missions that consumed thousands of rounds daily. Infantry divisions received ammunition resupply continuously, never rationing, never conserving, firing as much as tactical situation demanded. Armoured divisions advanced with fuel trucks following immediately behind combat units, ensuring tanks never halted for lack of gasoline. Medical evacuation systems moved wounded from front lines to field hospitals within hours, providing care that maximized survival rates and returned lightly wounded to combat quickly. The logistics supporting American operations in Europe was itself larger than many national militaries. The communications zone, responsible for supply and administration in the European theatre, employed hundreds of thousands of personnel operating ports, railways, truck convoys, supply depots, maintenance facilities, hospitals. The Red Ball Express, the truck convoy system supplying advancing Allied forces after the Normandy breakout, operated nearly 6,000 vehicles at peak, delivering 12,500 tons of supplies daily. German forces observed this logistics apparatus with mixture of professional admiration and strategic despair. Wehrmacht logistics, even at peak efficiency, had never approached American capabilities. German supply systems relied heavily on captured enemy equipment, requisitioned civilian transport, horse-drawn wagons. Ammunition was carefully rationed. Fuel was perpetually scarce. Food supplies were often inadequate. Medical care, though professionally administered, was limited by shortage of supplies and facilities. The contrast was so extreme that some German prisoners initially refused to believe they were seeing actual American operational logistics rather than propaganda demonstrations. Surely no army operated with such abundance. Surely the massive supply dumps, the endless convoys, the wasteful consumption of resources represented special arrangements for prisoner observation? But interrogation revealed that captured German soldiers consistently described American material abundance as shocking, unprecedented, almost incomprehensible by Wehrmacht standards. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, recognized after Normandy that the war was lost. His June 20th, 1944, assessment identified Allied air superiority as the decisive factor, but underlying that air superiority was industrial capacity that made German resistance ultimately futile. When Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel asked what should be done, von Rundstedt replied with brutal honesty, "Make peace, you idiots. What else can you do?" He was dismissed July 4th, officially for age and health reasons, actually for recognizing mathematical reality. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who commanded Army Group B defending Normandy, tried to convince Hitler that the war in the West was lost and Germany should seek peace before total destruction. On July 15th, 1944, Rommel sent Hitler a letter stating that the situation on the Normandy front was growing worse every day and was rapidly approaching crisis. The unequal struggle was approaching its end. 2 days later, July 17th, Rommel's staff car was strafed by Allied aircraft. He survived with severe head injuries that ended his active military service. On October 14th, 1944, implicated in the July 20th plot against Hitler, Rommel was forced to commit suicide. The Desert Fox, who had recognized American capabilities early, was destroyed by the regime he served. Von Rundstedt was actually brought back as Commander-in-Chief West in September 1944 because Hitler had few other commanders with equivalent experience. He commanded during the Ardennes offensive, which ultimately failed for the same reasons that doomed all German operations after Normandy. Insufficient fuel, limited air support, overwhelming Allied material superiority. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, the evidence of American industrial might was undeniable even to the most fanatical true believers. The final accounting of American military mobilization revealed the magnitude of German intelligence failure. The United States Army deployed 91 divisions during World War II. 61 divisions served in Europe. 15 divisions operated in the Mediterranean theater. 22 divisions fought in the Pacific. This was 3 times what German intelligence predicted as maximum possible American effort. More significantly, American divisions were maintained at near full strength throughout the war. German divisions, by contrast, declined steadily from authorized levels. A German infantry division at full strength comprised approximately 17,000 personnel. By 1945, many German divisions fielded fewer than 7,000 combat-effective soldiers. American divisions maintained authorized strength of 15,000 for infantry, 10,800 for armored divisions, through continuous replacement flows. The replacement system was itself remarkable in scale. American training facilities produced hundreds of thousands of individual replacements annually. Basic training centers graduated recruits every few weeks. Advanced individual training schools taught specialized skills. Replacement depots in Europe processed thousands of personnel monthly, matching individuals to units based on casualties and needs. The entire system operated with assembly line efficiency, treating trained soldiers as interchangeable components that could be produced continuously to maintain combat formations. German replacement systems, fragmented and inefficient even when functioning, collapsed under pressure of multi-front war and Allied strategic bombing. Training facilities were bombed, transportation networks were disrupted. Qualified instructors were scarce. Replacements reaching frontline units were increasingly young, poorly trained, inadequately prepared. By late 1944, Wehrmacht divisions received replacements measured in dozens when they needed thousands. American divisions received thousands monthly. The equipment advantage was equally overwhelming. American tank production in 1944 alone exceeded total German tank production for the entire war. Aircraft production, artillery production, truck production all showed similar disparities. American industry produced approximately two-thirds of all Allied military equipment, while simultaneously maintaining consumer economy that fed civilians adequately, housed them comfortably, and provided reasonable living standards. German economy, fully mobilized for total war, exploiting conquered territories and slave labor ruthlessly, could not match American output in any major category. Perhaps most devastating was American ability to sustain this production and deployment while fighting two major theaters simultaneously. The Pacific War against Japan absorbed substantial American resources. 22 divisions, enormous naval forces, extensive air power, massive logistics support, all while Europe remained the priority theater. Germany, fighting on two fronts after 1941, was steadily crushed, between Soviet forces advancing from the east and Anglo-American forces attacking from the west and south. Adding the Japanese conflict to American commitments should have divided and weakened American effort. Instead, America demonstrated capacity to fight global war on multiple fronts simultaneously, while maintaining material superiority everywhere. The strategic lesson was brutal and undeniable. Modern industrial warfare between major powers is decided by industrial capacity and organizational ability to translate capacity into combat power. Tactical skill matters. Professional military traditions matter. Courage and determination matter. But when one side can deploy 3 times as many divisions as enemy intelligence predicted, when those divisions can be maintained at full strength despite heavy casualties, when logistics can support operations at scales enemy forces consider impossible, tactical advantages become irrelevant. German military tradition emphasized quality over quantity. Elite units, professional soldiers, superior tactics. It was the first truly global industrial war where victory required not just military skill, but economic capacity to sustain multi-year, multi-theater operations against multiple enemies simultaneously. America possessed that capacity, Germany did not. Once American industrial mobilization reached full stride in 1943 and 1944, German defeat became mathematical certainty, regardless of battlefield performance. The Wehrmacht officers who stood in observation posts in late 1944, watching yet another fresh American division move into position, were witnessing the proof of German strategic failure. The intelligence assessments from 1942, predicting America would struggle to field 20 to 30 divisions, had been catastrophically wrong. The comfortable assumptions about American military incompetence, based on peacetime army size and lack of combat experience, had been devastatingly mistaken. The confident predictions that American industrial capacity was exaggerated, propaganda had been proven false by observable reality. By December 19, 1944, when the Oberstleutnant in the Hurtgen Forest watched American divisions deploying for counterattacks against the Ardennes offensive, the numbers told a story that no amount of Nazi ideology could deny. America had deployed not 20 or 30 divisions to Europe, but 61, including the Mediterranean and Pacific, 91 divisions total. These divisions were maintained at authorized strength. They were supplied abundantly. They operated with air superiority that made German daytime movement suicidal. They fired artillery at rates that consumed more ammunition in hours than German units received in months. The soft, undisciplined American soldiers that German propaganda promised would be easy victories had instead become an inexorable tide. Not because American soldiers were individually superior to Wehrmacht troops, German soldiers often demonstrated better tactical proficiency, maintained discipline under worse conditions, achieved more with less. But in modern industrial warfare, individual soldier quality mattered less than cumulative organizational capacity. An army that could field 91 divisions, maintain them at strength, supply them abundantly, and replace losses continuously, would defeat an army with better individual soldiers but deteriorating strength, inadequate supplies, and irreplaceable casualties. The Wehrmacht discovered this truth the hard way. From 1942 through 1945, German forces won countless tactical engagements against American troops. They demonstrated superior small unit tactics, better camouflage discipline, more effective use of terrain, superior marksmanship. These tactical victories achieved nothing, strategically, because America could absorb defeats, learn lessons, and return stronger. Germany could not. Every American division destroyed or severely damaged in combat was rebuilt or replaced. The 1st Infantry Division fought from North Africa through Sicily, Italy, Normandy, across France, and into Germany. They sustained casualties approaching 176% of authorized strength, meaning the division was effectively destroyed and rebuilt nearly twice. Yet the division remained combat effective throughout, continuously reinforced, re-equipped, and returned to battle. The 3rd Infantry Division suffered similar casualties, remained continuously engaged from North Africa through the end of European war, maintained combat effectiveness through constant personnel replacement. German divisions that sustained 50% casualties were lucky to receive enough replacements to reach 75% strength. Most simply declined until they were no longer viable combat formations and were disbanded, their remnants folded into other units. By April 1945, Wehrmacht order of battle listed hundreds of divisions, but many existed only on paper. Actual combat strength had dwindled to fragments. American divisions arriving in Europe in March and April 1945 were fresh, fully equipped, ready for combat. German formations facing them were exhausted remnants. The Battle of the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945 illustrated the final collapse of Wehrmacht resistance. Approximately 325,000 German soldiers surrendered in the largest mass surrender of the war in the West. Among the surrendered forces were remnants of dozens of divisions, many reduced to battalion or company strength. These were professional soldiers, many with years of combat experience, who recognized continued resistance was suicide. They faced American forces that included divisions which had landed in France in March 1945, never before in combat, but fully trained, completely equipped, backed by limitless logistics. Quality had not overcome quantity. Experience had not defeated material superiority. German tactical proficiency had not prevented strategic defeat. The mathematics of industrial warfare had proven decisive. The nation that could produce, deploy, and sustain more divisions, supported by more extensive logistics, backed by greater industrial capacity, won the war regardless of tactical excellence. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, American ground forces in Europe consisted of 61 divisions organized in 5 field armies, supported by the most extensive logistics system ever created. These forces occupied Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia. They would remain as occupation forces while hundreds of thousands of American servicemen were demobilized and returned home. Within a year, rapid demobilization reduced American military strength dramatically, but even post-war occupation forces exceeded what German intelligence in 1942 predicted as maximum American deployment capability. The story of Wehrmacht miscalculation regarding American military potential reveals fundamental truths about intelligence analysis and strategic planning. Assumptions based on peacetime observations can be catastrophically wrong when applied to wartime mobilization. Industrial capacity that appears modest in peace can achieve extraordinary output when fully mobilized for war. Organizational systems that seem inefficient by traditional military standards can prove devastatingly effective when scaled to industrial dimensions. German intelligence officers in 1941 and 1942 examined American military establishment and saw a small, poorly equipped, inexperienced force. They calculated, based on Wehrmacht expansion experience, that building a large modern army would take years. Their analysis was logical, systematic, based on observable facts. But they failed to recognize that American structural advantages, industrial reserve capacity, larger population, geographic security, organizational flexibility, would enable mobilization at speeds German experience suggested were impossible. The soft, undisciplined American soldiers that propaganda promised would be easy victories turned out to be adequately trained, reasonably competent, and most critically, inexhaustible. For every American division destroyed, another arrived from the United States. For every casualty, replacements filled the ranks. For every tank destroyed, another rolled off assembly lines. For every aircraft shot down, 3 more appeared. The Wehrmacht learned, too late, that modern industrial warfare is won in factories and training camps before battles are fought on battlefields. The Oberstleutnant, in his observation post, watching yet another American division deploy, understood what many German officers had realized by late 1944. The intelligence briefing that predicted America would struggle to field 20 to 30 divisions was not just wrong, it was catastrophically, war-losingly wrong. America had fielded 91 divisions. They were deployed across Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Pacific. They were maintained at strength despite heavy casualties. They were supplied abundantly. They were supported by air forces that dominated the skies. And they would not stop until Germany was completely defeated. The crumpled intelligence briefing in his pocket, dated March 1942, represented the moment German strategic planning went fatally wrong. The assumptions were reasonable, the calculations were logical, the conclusions seemed inevitable, but reality proved otherwise. America's capacity for military mobilization exceeded German predictions by factors of 3 to 1. The soft soldiers became hard through combat experience. The undisciplined army developed. Effective doctrine. The industrial capacity that seemed inadequate proved overwhelming. 3 years after German intelligence confidently predicted America might eventually field 20 to 30 divisions with difficulty, 91 American divisions were operating worldwide. Wehrmacht commanders who dismissed American military potential in 1942 were by 1945 being crushed under the weight of American material superiority. The tactical excellence that won Wehrmacht so many battles could not overcome strategic reality. Germany faced too many enemies, fighting too many fronts, with too few resources. America possessed industrial capacity, manpower reserves, and organizational ability to sustain global war on multiple fronts simultaneously. The lesson transcended World War II. Modern industrial warfare between major powers is ultimately decided by relative industrial and economic capacity. The nation that can produce more weapons, deploy more forces, sustain longer operations, and replace losses continuously holds decisive advantage. Tactical skill, military tradition, soldier quality, all matter at operational level, but strategic outcomes are determined by capacity to generate and sustain combat power over extended periods. German officers standing in ruins of their defeated nation in May 1945, watching American occupation forces spreading across Germany, understood this lesson bitterly. The Wehrmacht had not lost because German soldiers were inferior. Individual German units often outfought American equivalents tactically. Germany lost because the United States could deploy 3 times as many divisions as German intelligence predicted. Maintain those divisions at full strength despite casualties, supply them at rates German forces could never achieve, and sustain this effort continuously for 3 years of intensive combat. The soft, undisciplined American soldiers that propaganda promised had instead become an avalanche. Not through superior individual quality, but through superior organizational capacity applied at industrial scale. The intelligence briefing predicting 20 to 30 divisions with difficulty had been proven wrong by reality of 91 divisions deployed worldwide. The comfortable assumption that American democracy was too weak, too divided, too soft to wage modern war had been shattered by demonstration of industrial mobilization unprecedented in human history. Wehrmacht officers learned, too late, that underestimating enemy potential based on peacetime appearances and ideological assumptions is strategically suicidal. America appeared militarily weak in 1941, but that weakness was peacetime choice, not structural limitation. When mobilized for war, American industrial capacity and organizational ability produced military forces that German strategic planning never seriously contemplated. By the time German commanders recognized their error, correction was impossible. The arithmetic of defeat was already written in deployment tables, showing American divisions arriving in Europe monthly, while German strength declined irreversibly. The Oberstleutnant folded the intelligence briefing, placed it back in his pocket, and watched another American artillery barrage pulverize German positions with shells fired at rates his own artillery could never match. Soft soldiers, undisciplined army, 20 to 30 divisions maximum. The predictions had all been wrong, catastrophically, war-losingly wrong, and Wehrmacht had paid for that error with total defeat. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.